So I had like 40 minutes of content. People can bug me after if they want more stuff. My area of interest, so I build a couple things. I build these kind of characters, virtual humans, we call them. But then my main interest is trying to understand what the role emotion plays in the context of this kind of technology. Now, technology is evoking a lot of emotion recently. Stanford maybe is one of the centers of that. And it's actually interesting. Technology, the threats to our identity that technology creates actually shapes the way we think of ourselves. So traditionally, we thought of humans are better than others because we're smart, we use language. But now we're increasingly willing to say that machines can be smart. And so we're starting to see a shift now where we identify ourselves as special because we still have emotion, at least. And so part of my job is to get rid of that illusion. So there's a lot of research and interest in computer science now. How do we make machines emotionally intelligent? And there's a lot of applications driving that. Speaking of driving, there's this application in California where there's a company that's trying to make a machine that can detect I'm getting angry in my car and give me a little massage to try to calm me down. Sidney DeMello at Notre Dame, he's looking at how can you detect a student's affect and regulate the kind of material we're presenting to them to keep them not frustrated but also not bored. Some of the stuff you'll see me talking about today is could we use this kind of technology actually to teach us to be more human? So teach people better how to better recognize emotion or understand another person's emotion. There's a lot of interest in using affect to persuade people to do various things. So Tim Bickmore at Northeastern has been using affect to try to get people to take their medicine, for example, in medical settings. And this little product here, if you smile, it's well known if you smile, that makes you happier. And so if you smile, it'll give you a candy bar, and now you'll like this product even better. Of course, also, we do a lot of things as people to create emotions in others through artifacts like movies and food, and increasingly machines are trying to do this as well. This is some work in my lab. I want to just give an example of a machine that understands and tries to use emotion. This is Ellie. She's part of a project that DARPA funded, and their question was, could we use technology to reach soldiers who have PTSD that don't want to talk about it? Part of the problem with PTSD is it's a stigmatizing condition. Soldiers don't want to admit they're weak, and the question that the funder, Rush Schilling, was interested in is, could people, would they be more comfortable talking to something like this? And this was kind of weird to me as a project because if you look at the disclosure literature, there's one line of research that says that people are more honest and willing to disclose information to computer forms. But there's another line of research that says that people are more willing to disclose if you establish some kind of rapport and connection and draw people out. And I was kind of fascinated. What if you put these two things together? Does it be the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds? And fortunately for us, we have some evidence that actually people are more willing to disclose honest information about their mental health to this kind of character than they would to either a computer form or another person. But I'm not going to talk about that so much today. I'm going to talk about the technology underlying it. So let me just play a little example of this interaction.
Hi, I'm Ellie. Thanks for coming in today. I was created to talk to people in a safe and secure environment. I'm not a therapist, but I'm here to learn about people and would love to learn about you. I'll ask a few questions to get us started. And please feel free to tell me anything. Your answers are totally confidential. Are you okay with this?
Yes.
So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
That's good. Where are you from originally?
I'm from Los Angeles.
Oh, I'm from LA myself.
It's true. Just to show a few things, what you're seeing on the left here is actually what the character can see of the person. And so this blue grid, that's actually tracking the facial expressions imposed on this person. Actually, it kind of looks like Jeremy a little bit to me. We're also looking at the affect that people are communicating in the audio signal. We have a connect here so we can look at postures. We can look at things like are people fidgeting, or these are called self-adapters, turn out to be very diagnostic. We can recognize the words and then do things like sentiment analysis on the text. And then you have this character here. It's showing facial expressions. It's showing postures. And more importantly, it's doing this kind of contingent moment-to-moment feedback that people do when they're being attentive. So like if you nod and smile as I'm talking, I'll give a better talk. And similarly, if she nods and smiles or shows concern at the right point, it draws people out. All this in this case was to try to get at can we get information about depression, both by drawing people out and having them say more words about their condition, but also by using all these kind of nonverbal emotional signals to see if they correlate with certain aspects of depression and PTSD. Now, that kind of technology in general is associated with this emerging field called affective computing. There's a journal that's been out about 7 years. There's a society associated with it. And just if you're interested, there's a couple of meetings coming up soon in the Society for Affective Science. There's going to be a pre-conference on affective computing on the first day. And then our big conference will be in San Antonio this year in the fall. I'm going to basically touch on this talk 3 aspects of affective computing as it arises in my own work. And one is really the relationship between affect and individual cognition. So what is the antecedents, where does emotion come from in a person? How does it influence their decision making? And can you make a machine that can predict those kind of influences and simulate them in certain circumstances? A second thing I'll touch on is emotion and social cognition. So how do people react to another person's emotions? But more interesting from my standpoint, if a computer shows an emotion, would that influence people in similar ways or differently? And then, assuming that machine emotion does influence people, the last thing I want to talk about is how can they use that against us in a sense? So how can a machine use emotion to get people to do certain things, maybe for themselves to help them take their medicine, but also maybe sell them more expensive cars? Now, a couple of themes I'll talk about. One is that usually in artificial intelligence, we build on this sort of rational tradition of how people or how machines should think. Here's our prototypical example. And in reality, people are kind of more like this, right? And that has certain kinds of consequences. Some are societal consequences. And AI would benefit from having a better understanding and awareness of how emotion telegraphs actions we might take, but also influences the kind of decisions we make. Another theme I want to really emphasize, and Jeremy touched on this, is the importance of interdisciplinary research. And so what you'll see throughout my talk is I'm very grounded in the theories underlying human emotion, but then I try to take those theories and reconstitute them within computational artifacts, and then have people interact with those artifacts, and through empirical research both improve the artifacts, but in some cases make contributions to psychological theory. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about, and this is some of the early work I did, is how, if we want to build a character like Ellie here, and you're interacting with it, how does Ellie know what emotions would be appropriate to show in a certain situation? Where do emotions come from in people? And this is work I've done through many years with my close colleague Stacy Marcello, who's now at Northeastern University. And I've been very influenced by a theoretical perspective called appraisal theory. And I think if you're a computer scientist, appraisal theory, for some reasons you'll see in a moment, is actually a very nice theory for building computational artifacts. But in a kind of brief overview, the way appraisal theory argues is that emotion is this relational construct. It arises not just from things inside of us, but the relationship between things inside of us and events in the world. So let's say I want to be a mad scientist, and I fail my first math test, then appraisal theory argues I judge the relationship between that event and my goals along certain dimensions. Was it good or bad? Probably bad. Did I expect to fail the test? How much control do I have over it? And who do I blame, myself or the teacher, for example? And based on those patterns of appraisals, that will tend to elicit certain emotional responses. But further, it'll help shape how I respond to that emotional event. So if I feel I have control over that situation, I may double down, hire a tutor, try to do better next time. Or I may decide I have no control over what's going on in this classroom and join a band. Give up my goal of being a mad scientist. Now, if you're a computer scientist, what you should notice is these kind of what are called appraisal variables actually map on pretty closely to some well understood concepts in computer science, like utility, probability, planning, credit assignment. And so part of what we did, Stacy and myself, is reconstrued those appraisal constructs into these well-understood concepts in computer science. And so we basically showed how to remap different kinds of appraisal variables into well-understood things like planning and decision theory. And so you could map in, say, an agent's goals and then have it, an AI algorithm reason about how are the consequences of these events impacting an agent's goals. And then we had these shallow automatic rules that would fire over the syntactic structure and calculate what these appraisals are. So basically, as the planner was doing its thing and reasoning about goals and coming up with plans for how to achieve its goals, or reason about threats to those plans, you kind of automatically get these appraisals popping out of what would be a plausible emotion for this agent to feel based on what it's thinking about at the moment. And then these emotions essentially served as search control knowledge that would bias how the AI algorithm worked, whether it focused on perception, what kind of plans seemed most promising. And as it did then planning based on that search control and changed the contents of working memory, came up with different ways to solve its goals, you'd automatically, for free, see these emotions change over time. And so you'd actually get this kind of nice dynamic coupling between belief, desires, intentions of the agent leading to these emotional appraisals, and those appraisals then shaping the actions it did. And what was nice and important about this model was it's domain independent. So all this stuff was acting on the syntax of these representations, and then you could just throw in your particular domain theory for a particular domain, and you kind of get the emotions for free. Now, what can you do with this kind of model? Some of what you could do is you could see, is it predictive of what humans might do in similar situations? And so some of the more psychological work we did was to take common situations, encode them in the model, and see if people, in fact, behaved in a similar way that the model predicted. And we've done this in some like common life situations. We've done a lot of stuff with games. So we had people play things like Battleship and word puzzles and stuff, and some moral judgments. Let me just give a quick example of one of these. This is some of the work of Wenji Mao, one of my PhD students, former PhD students, where she would take these common moral dilemmas and try to encode them into the model and reason about who would you be mad at in this situation. So in this case, here's a CEO that wants to do something, and his VP says it'll increase profits but harm the environment. The CEO says, I don't care, let's do it anyway. And the environment is harmed. And what the model would predict is that you would tend to be more angry at the CEO than the VP. But then you could also, because you have this model, you can kind of reason backwards from the model and say, well, what would you need to change in the situation to change the way who you'd be mad at? And so then she took both the original situations and these new hypotheticals that were generated automatically from the model, gave them to people, and showed that the people's judgments corresponded to what the model predicted. So that was kind of nice. Now, a lot of what I'm paid to do, though, is to build these simulations of people that interact in a variety of different circumstances. So a lot of the work we've done with the model is tried to show that adding this model into a system would make it act in a more human-like or believable way. And so across a variety of applications, a lot of these are military-funded applications, so put a soldier in a situation where they're interacting with people and they're responding emotionally. And a lot of the focus at that point was to try to say we need emotion because it makes these characters more believable. And so that's what we were able to show. We put these characters and they respond emotionally in a way that seemed believable. And so that's what a lot of the work we've done on the cognitive aspect of the model have been. But I guess it was not just satisfied to say emotion makes things more believable. I was curious if people actually responded to these characters as they might to another person if they were showing an emotion in that context. And so the next kind of phase of the work I focused on, this is with my former PhD student, and he did a postdoc with Peter Carnival, a social psychologist at USC, was how do people respond to a machine that is creating an emotion at them? And the theory that we developed to think about this, we call reverse appraisal theory, and it kind of works like this. So as I just mentioned, appraisal theory argues that emotion arises from how a person interprets an event vis-a-vis their goals. And so imagine I'm walking down a street and I see a robot approaching me, and the robot steps on my foot, okay? And then the robot smiles, okay? What does that tell you? Well, what we argue is that basically when you see someone show an emotional expression, what you want to do is make sense of it, essentially in terms of this appraisal theory. So what you're saying is, okay, he smiled. He probably has a bad goal. He probably wants to hurt me, okay? And that's essentially what reverse appraisal theory argues, is that when you see an emotion in the context of some event, you try to invent what would be the goal that would explain that emotion from arising. Let me give you a little more concrete example. Imagine you're playing something called the iterated prisoner's dilemma game with a robot Einstein in this case. So who knows what the prisoner's dilemma is? Okay, most of you. Prisoner's dilemma is this evil game invented by economists to look at how do people make social decisions. And it's constructed in such a way that there's an economic incentive to cooperate with your partner, okay? So you get the most money in this game if you cooperate, you choose a cooperative choice. However, it's an incentive structure is such that if you choose to cooperate and they choose to be non-cooperative, they make a lot of money. So there's this temptation for them to screw you and a fear that you'll be screwed. And in fact, the rational thing to do is to not cooperate. And although you end up with less money, you're not going to be screwed over by the other guy. Now, turns out when people actually play this game, they cooperate much more than would be predicted by rational models. And it's been argued that emotion plays an important role in how people resolve this dilemma. And in particular, I'm interested, and others have been looked at, how do emotional signaling help people solve this problem? So imagine we allow our robot to signal, and we're playing this game, and he smiles. Do you want to cooperate with him? So you're probably focused on the morphology of this smile, thinking it's not trustworthy. But I actually want to talk about the information content. And the information content is, should you smile? Should you cooperate with him? Well, it depends on the context of where that smile arose, is what we're arguing. So if we play this game and we manage to cooperate together, and he smiles, then you think, okay, he probably has good intentions, and I should continue to cooperate. On the other hand, if we're playing this game and he just exploited me and he smiles, that probably tells me something very different, that maybe he's not such a good robot and I shouldn't trust him the next round, okay? And so to test this, what we did was we basically created two agents, two robots, and we gave them different goals. One was a goal of cooperation and one was a goal of competition. And we ran that goal through appraisal theory to calculate what emotion should you show in all the possible 4 states of the prisoner's dilemma game. And so if you're cooperative and we cooperate, you should be happy and smile. If for whatever reason you screw over your opponent, but you want to be cooperative, you should feel guilty. On the other hand, if you're competitive, you successfully screwed over your opponent, you should be happy and smile. But if you passed up the opportunity, if they cooperated and you failed to screw them over, you should feel guilty because you passed up the opportunity to make some more money. And so we created this matrix of expressions. Now, both agents actually played exactly the same way. They just played tit for tat. And so in some sense, the only differences you should see between how people play these two agents is based on their impression of what the other agent will do. And that's determined by these emotional expressions. And we hypothesized that people will recover the goals of the agent by these patterns of facial expressions, and that would lead them to either cooperate or non-cooperate. Let me give you an example of what this looks like. So here's a woman playing a cooperative agent, and she starts out and she exploits the agent. And the agent shows displeasure at this. She tries to repair the relationship, so she cooperates. The agent's playing tit for tat, so it actually screws her back, but it looks sad. And then she persists in cooperating, and they manage to meet mutual cooperation. And of course, that's one nice anecdote, probably the best one. But if you look at groups of people, what you see is that people actually quickly discover, or they infer intent based on these patterns, facial expressions, and they cooperate much more with the agent that shows this cooperative pattern of emotions as opposed to one that shows a competitive pattern of emotions. And through a number of other studies, doing mediation analysis, both experimentally and statistically, we can show what's really going on, or seems to be going on here, is that people see the pattern of expression. From that, they infer how the other is appraising the situation and whether their goal is competitive or cooperative, and then they change their behavior accordingly. Okay? Now, that's with a fairly simple robot-like thing. It's doing a very simple script. It's probably easy for people to figure out what the pattern is. So we wanted to also see, do people really do this when they're interacting with each other? And so one way we did this is we basically had people play a version of Prisoner's Dilemma over Skype. So here, if you're the player, you see yourself, or you see your opponent just screws you over, and then you can communicate back to them. And in this case, you couldn't talk. All you could communicate is non-verbally. And we wanted to see if those nonverbal signals were informative, both of what people wanted to do, but how others respond to those signals. And what we're able to do with this data is we can automatically synchronize and track people's facial expressions, synchronize that with what choices they're making in this game. We can also look at, say, does personality influence this? And then we can try to see, is that information predictive? And so what you're seeing here is the state space of iterative prisoners game. It's a pretty simple game, only 4 basic states. And people tend to get stuck in these 2 equilibrium where they have joint cooperation or defection. But if you're cooperating, then your opponent can turn around and exploit you. So one thing we're able to show is that emotions actually are signaling people's intentions in the game. So if you tend to smile after mutual cooperation, you're more likely to cooperate in the next round. Okay, so the expression does have information content that is telegraphing what you're going to do. The other thing we can show is that opponents can pick up on this information. So when you see your opponent smile, it turns out you're actually more likely to screw them over in the next round. So people are using this information to infer intent and then make that judgment as to whether to take advantage of the other person. Now, it turns out that you don't have to use that information to take advantage of the other person. You can actually, some people use that information to continue to cooperate. In fact, those are the ones that actually won the most points over the whole game. But locally, a lot of people took advantage of that information. But then they ended up in this sort of mutual defection cycle. And so the good takeaway is that people that see the other is going to cooperate and use that for pro-social motives are the ones that won in this game. Okay, so the final thing I want to talk about is, can we use this information to influence human behavior? And this is work I'm doing recently with some social psychologists in the former European Union, in UK and in Amsterdam. And basically the idea here being that so as I mentioned before, appraisal theory argues that emotion arises from this appraisal of how an event is happening in the world. So if a robot steps on my foot, it has bad intentions, it'll smile, okay? Now, the second part that I mentioned is that observers see that expression in the context in which it was elicited, and they do this kind of mentalizing mind reading on it. So they figure out, okay, if he smiled in that context, he must have evil intentions, and therefore I know what to do with him. Now, the trick is that the sender actually knows that you're doing that to them. They know you're looking at their facial expressions. And so they might express something different than they actually feel. And they may do this for actually pro-social reasons. So, if I don't like Jeremy's shorts, I could say, those are really nice shorts, though, Jeremy. And they match well with the shoes. Or I could use them against Jeremy to sell him a more expensive car. And so, for example, if this robot decides to look guilty after just stepping on my foot, he can make me think he's a good robot and then step on my foot again, right? So that's the game we're going to play and see, can we use this framework to try to understand something about human behavior and how people use emotions strategically to achieve certain kinds of ends. And actually, to study this, I mean, if from the psychological perspective, you need to find situations where people are willing to show emotions in these very strategic ways. And it turns out that one great domain for studying this is negotiation. And it's very easy to get people to spontaneously manipulate each other in a negotiation context, particularly if you pay them money. So this is a big data set we've been collecting. A little hard to see what's going on here, but these are two people that are sitting across the table. So you can see this guy down here and this guy up here. And they have these items on the table, and they each have a secret payoff matrix of how much money they can get for obtaining each of these blocks. And these blocks have pictures on them like lamps and chairs and things like that. And they're allowed to just talk for 15 minutes and come to an agreement. If they fail to come to an agreement, they only get one of these items. So they have an incentive to come to an agreement, but then they also want to get the best agreement that they can get. So it's what's known as a mixed motive situation. You have both interest in exploiting the other, but you have to be able to be cooperative in order to get any agreement at all. And let me just show an example of these two guys interacting.
This can't be broke up. Okay, like I said before, if you get one, why do you want one? Do you sell half a car? I won't accept it. I will only take the 3. And if I don't get the 3, then all I'm going to do is take the 1, and that's just going to keep us at a stalemate and get nowhere. Okay? And then if you're going to...
So, it's a very unpleasant person. And he's actually using this unpleasantness. He actually gets the best deal of anyone that we've did in this study. And what he's saying here, he's saying if we don't reach an agreement, we'll both walk away with 1 block. So give me everything I want, or you're only going to get 1 thing. So he's using threats. All right, and you'll see that a lot in these negotiation contexts. So within this work, the real question I'm asking is, how do people and perhaps machines figure out if they want to fake an emotion to achieve a certain social goal, what emotion should they show and in what circumstances? And then if you're the recipient of that, if you're getting and interacting with this person or machine that's showing possibly fake emotions, how do you know if it's fake or real? How do you solve that problem? And how do you incorporate that into your decision-making process? And the sort of overarching argument I want to make is that this idea of appraisal and reverse appraisal can help you build algorithms to try to solve these problems. So let me give you a more concrete example. So imagine these two people are trying to figure out how to partition these items on the table, okay? And the woman here on the left, she really wants apples, okay? But she doesn't want oranges. She actually loses money if she takes oranges. This guy over here, he's indifferent. He wants both of the things. And so if they're rational, what they should do is freely exchange information, assert their preferences either verbally or non-verbally, and then that they can calculate the sort of Nash equilibrium. They can find the most efficient, fair way to allocate these items that maximizes the social good and allows everyone to come away with about half the pie. And this is the deal that they would come up with in this case. It gives each of them $20. Alternatively, what you could do, if you're the woman here on the left, you could be a little bit cagey. You could ask a lot of questions. What do you like? Do you like this? Do you like that? Without necessarily revealing what you want. Get this guy to reveal what he wants, and then you can say, I like everything too. Oh well, how about this deal? It's not really happy about this deal, but I want to be fair, okay? If you look closely at this deal, what happens is she gets twice as much stuff as the other guy, but he feels like he got a good deal. He feels like it's a fair and efficient partitioning of the two items. So that's what I'm going to try to formalize here. So she's misrepresenting what she is interested in order to gain material gain. And using some tools from game theory, we tried to represent this as something I'm calling the misrepresentation game. And the basic idea is, how do we convey a false set of emotions such that you can maximize your own interests while leaving the other person to feel like they were treated fairly? And it's basically, you can formalize it as a two-stage game. The first part, I won't talk about so much, but requires preference solicitation stuff. So how do you most efficiently and effectively pull out what somebody wants with the fewest number of questions? And then given that you know what they want, then find a false set of preferences or emotions to show that leads the other to feel like they're treated fairly. It just turns out to be a little bit of math here. So this is basically an optimization problem. What you're trying to do is find the best set of emotions to convey to the other party such that you maximize your own reward while simultaneously satisfying certain social constraints. In this case, the social constraint is we want to be seen as fair. So we want the other person to believe that the deal is fair, we get the most, and then how do we show a pattern of emotions that allows us to do that? It turns out you can mathematically solve that and find what's the optimal lie in this case under certain assumptions. And it's something we call the fixed pi lie. And it's actually known to people studying negotiation research. And essentially, the lie is like this. Imagine that we're trying to divide these items on the table. And my opponent, they like apples best. Okay? And they don't care about pears. I like pears best. My agent likes pears best and doesn't like apples. Then what the agent should do is say, well, it's obvious we both want the apples, which turned out to be what the person wants the most. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you what you want the most if I just take the rest of the stuff, and we'll call it even. Okay? So this is called fixed pi lie because you're basically pretending like you both want the same things. It's a win-lose situation. In fact, there's opportunity to grow the pie. If the agent just said, hey, I want this most, you'd end up with the same deal, right? But in this case, she gets to take more of the stuff in the middle. And if you give this solution to people, if you have people interact with a system that would do this kind of lie, what you find out is they're much more willing to accept this unfair offer from the agent that lies than if it was honest or even if it said nothing about what it wants. And they're more satisfied with their outcome, and they think it was more fair. Okay? And so what makes this strategy particularly nasty is that people, when they come to a negotiation, they often assume the other is like them. And so it seems very natural and believable that this person wants the exact same things that they do. Now, that's again, this is an agent, it's kind of stylized, so do people actually do that to themselves? And so we went back to this large corpus of people negotiating with each other, and we tried to look at how they were communicating their preferences to the other party. And we found out, well, there's a lot of bad liars, but when people follow this strategy, they actually beat their opponents. And there's also some evidence that the people that employ this strategy are high in a certain personality trait called Machiavellianism. And Machiavellianism is a trait where you endorse the idea that we should use emotion to manipulate other people and not necessarily feel bad about it. Fortunately for you guys, there's also some evidence that we can automatically detect those people that are the liars in this. And there's a couple of ways to do that. One is there's some information about the morphology or the timing of their facial expressions that gives us evidence that they're deceptive. But more importantly in this context, what you should notice about this lie is that the person is saying they like one thing, but they're doing something different. And so there's this discrepancy between what people show and say and what they do that is pretty predictive of the fact that there's a deception going on. Okay, so what? What should we do with this? And one big question, and I'm actually on a IEEE ethics panel because I'm interested in what is the ethics behind it. Should we build agents that lie to people? And it's not so simple. On the one hand, from a financial perspective, people may actually prefer to buy this kind of agent, right? Because you can show that this agent will earn you more money if it negotiates on your behalf than an agent that's honest and open. And in fact, this is a dilemma that's confronted lawyers. So I got led through thinking about this question to legal ethics writings about should a lawyer be able to lie on their client's behalf in a negotiation. And if you look, at least in the United States, of the the ethical code that guides lawyers, they're not allowed to lie about certain things, but they are allowed to lie in negotiation about what's your limit, how enthusiastic you are for certain items, under the understanding that everyone does it, and in fact, that's the way that your client's going to make more money. And in fact, if you're completely open and honest about what your client would settle for, that would put you at a conflict of interest with your client. And so you're in some sense ethically bound to misrepresent in certain ways. At least that's the argument. The counter argument to that is that whenever you add deception to a negotiation, you undermine the social good. So the efficiency of the negotiation, you'll fail to find solutions that you might have been able to because you misunderstand what the other party wants. But also there's contexts where you can show that being deceptive is actually helps the social good. Or imagine a situation where it's pretty likely in a rescue situation somebody's going to die and they're panicking, but if you tell them it's very likely they're going to live, they might calm down enough so there's actually some chance of saving them. Where if you're completely truthful and say, yeah, you have a 90% chance of dying. So there's all these kind of questions where deception and basically human politeness often involves a certain notion of deception, right? So I don't know the answer, just to say that it's not completely obvious. And one of my current thinking is we should at least bind these agents to the same ethical guidelines that humans that are fulfilling the same role are held to. Now, what I'm actually doing with it right now is I'm using it to drive the behavior of virtual negotiators. And the idea being if you can practice negotiation with an agent that's deceptive, maybe you'll learn to be better at detecting these kind of deceptive tactics. So let me give you an example of interaction with this. So here you can see the items on the table, and they're negotiating over it.
Well, I don't think we're going to come to an agreement.
It's pretty obvious that we both want the chairs.
It's pretty obvious, isn't it? But,
Yeah.
you know, like I said, I'll give you one.
Well,
How about that?
that doesn't seem fair, though.
It doesn't? Well,
Not really.
I guess we can't come to no agreement then, can we?
What do you think about me getting 2 chairs and the clock and you getting 1 chair and both plates? You'll probably make most of your profit off of these plates.
No, I won't. Because I know these chairs have more value.
Yeah.
So I will not let you have 2 chairs.
Of course the chairs are worth something.
Yes, they are. So I'm going to take all 3.
That doesn't seem fair, though.
It's not fair. So I guess we won't come to an agreement, will we?
So now you see she's doing the same thing that guy did at the beginning. She's saying, give me what I want or we won't come to an agreement. Now, one thing that's nice about this system is we can actually automatically extract a number of statistics about how they're playing. And one of the things I'm working with right now is a professor in the business school who teaches negotiation. And we're playing with, so he has these negotiation principles he tries to teach. So for example, you do better in a negotiation if you start with a very ambitious offer. People often come in, they want to be fair, and they end up miscommunicating what they really want, but also walking away with less. And you can automatically calculate through a number of these kind of negotiation principles to what extent is a student following them, compare them to the rest of the class. You can also track their facial expressions and look at, for example, are they communicating what they think they're communicating through their emotional expressions. Okay, so what I tried to do in this talk is, in the beginning, I tried to talk about how you can build these models of what a person might likely feel in the moment based on how events are impacting their goals, and use those models both to predict how people might react emotionally in certain kind of contexts, what decisions they make, but then drive the behavior of realistic characters in various simulations that behave as people do when they're experiencing emotion. I then kind of try to show that just the fact that your computer doesn't mean that people won't react to your emotional displays, and that people use those emotional displays as information to figure out what the belief, desires, intentions of the other, whether the other is a person or a machine, is in somewhat irrelevant. It's that these emotions convey information, and that information is important for driving social interaction. And then finally, that both with people and possibly with machines, that emotion is not necessarily what you think it is. And when you're trying to recognize someone's emotion, you shouldn't strictly just look at what they're showing on their face, but be aware of what's being shown on the face may be a misrepresentation of the actual feeling, often done with express purposes of manipulating the outcomes in a social interaction. And that both these techniques can be used to understand how people do that, to perhaps automatically identify the tells for when that's being done, and possibly have machines do this themselves, both for pro-social and pro-self reasons. And the kind of high-level takeaway is it's a big advertisement if you're an appraisal theorist that this is the way, this is the particular theory of emotion that's very useful for building these kind of computational methods. Now, there's a lot of other stuff I do that I don't have time to talk about. One interest is kind of, in general, the psychology of technology. How do people relate to technological artifacts? And can the way they relate to other people give us some insight into the way that machines should be built or the way they evoke responses from people? Do a lot of work in mental health, as you saw at the beginning. And obviously, I'm also using this technology now to understand negotiation processes and beginning to get interested in ethical concerns. And this is my group, and I'm happy to talk about anything else or take questions.
So, say the Warriors, the basketball team, they obviously do fakes or whatever it's called. Could you use an AI platform and train them to better recognize what's going on?
That's interesting. So actually, my original thesis advisor, Greg Collins, he was a student of Roger Shank, and his thesis was analyzing how people come up with these strategies in sporting events, where basically the way those techniques work is you set yourself up where you could go one way or the other, and you allow yourself. I haven't actually, well, you probably can answer that question. You have a whole company around that. Have you looked at, like, does VR let you help understand tells? Or?
You're the expert.
Yeah, so I thought about it in sporting events. That's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, basically, I would guess, and what you should be looking for in general when you're doing some action is you're preparing your body to do something, and you try to look for inconsistencies in, are you fully committed to that action, or are you only showing some aspects of that action and showing something else that's inconsistent? So, like, just in that negotiation tactic, there's a discrepancy there. That they're doing one thing, but they also seem to be preparing to do something else. You try to look for those kind of inconsistencies. Yeah.
So when we talk to humans or disclose and show emotion to humans, we have some sense of what their computational limits are because they have a brain kind of like ours-ish. Mm-hmm. Have you looked or seen folks think about what they expect or think the AI system is remembering, how long it's going to have it, and whether or not it's going to opt into other areas of my life?
So I haven't directly looked at that question, although some people have. But one thing that's kind of interesting, so the disclosures, what we found with the first study where you're interviewed, what's kind of fascinating about that finding is that people come in, they sign a consent form saying, researchers will look at this data, and then they could also opt in, and about 75% opt in to allow me to share a video of them with other researchers across the country. And then they have this camera trained on them, right? And then they're told, this is run by an AI, or they're told this is run by a person in the other room. And that last bit of information seems to be driving this effect. So even though at some abstract level they know that they're not anonymous, that immediate belief that this is an AI somehow, there's not someone in the moment, seems to be important. And it doesn't seem to make any quote-unquote rational sense. And there's a lot of examples of these where it's the vividness of the knowledge that's more important than the knowledge itself, which to drive the interaction. Now, there is a fair amount of work in anthropomorphism and people like Gray and Wegner and I think it's Waits at Northwestern that look at folk theories of machines and what things are machines capable of, not capable of. And a lot of it boils down to roughly, does the machine have intellect and does it have an emotion? And then certain tasks are seen to be better suited for those different kinds of jobs. But yeah, we should, if we run some more things, we should run a lot more kind of questions of people's expectations, both going in and afterwards. Yeah, Jeremy.
So I'm really fascinated with this idea of leaked emotions versus constructed strategic emotions. And could you talk a little bit about what we know about how people do that in the real world? Forget machines for a second. What are the norms? I mean, this Ekman versus Fridland. I'm always trying to understand how often we can strategically use these facial expressions.
Yeah, well, it's an old debate, and I guess the main argument, no one disagrees that people do it. The question is, are there really tells? So Fridland is on the extreme of saying we never show what we feel, and there's no evolutionary argument for why we would ever evolve to show what we feel, because we could always be exploited. Versus others that say there's all this great evolutionary argument why we should show what we feel because it allows us to cooperate and coordinate efficiently. So I don't have a way to settle that debate. I mean, there is some evidence, and we've seen some of that evidence in our data, that there are subtle indicators of, and people are good to some extent, not great, at detecting faked versus authentic expressions. And some of that comes from, for example, Van Cleef in the negotiation context, trained people to be method actors and authentically express anger versus told them, hey, express anger. And the ones that were told, hey, just express anger, it backfired and they lost money trying to show anger in a negotiation. And there's work on the temporal dynamics of facial. So if your facial expression, work by Eva Kronhuber, if you have a fast onset, long apex, and fast offset, that's interpreted as an inauthentic display. It's called the politician smile. Okay. Also, there's some, from the clinical literature, there's some data that, and we see evidence of this in some of our data, that people engage in what are called smile controls. They do certain things with their mouth in order to mask an expression. And if you use very rapid analysis of facial expressions, you often see there's an onset of a negative expression that's then quickly masked over with a smile. So I think there are quote unquote tells, but it's very hard, and I haven't seen good replicable research that reliably, shows them in naturalistic situations. Let me get her and then I'll come back. Yeah.
I'm curious if any studies that shows that it's possible to teach machine understanding human emotional memories or trigger words.
So, can you elaborate a little bit on the question?
Yeah. So, like for example, maybe there's some childhood stories that gives you some sort of association with certain items or trigger words. Is there a way to teach machine to understand those underlying cause for the emotional associations we have right now with a specific toy or stories with food?
I don't know. I guess my sense would be that those are very idiosyncratic to an individual, and that you'd have to. I mean, there are probably commonalities within a culture to certain kind of touchstone artifacts that would tend to evoke certain kinds of, a mother's voice or certain kind of animals. But a lot of it is probably idiosyncratic to a particular individual, and so you'd have to somehow get a lot of information about that. And observe. I mean, it's very increasingly easy to do now. Observe someone over time and try to even there's a lot of interest in wireless or experience sampling, and try to get at what is changing a person's mood throughout a day, and could you somehow identify the events that seem to do that would be one possible way to go about that. I'm not that familiar with work that's an interesting question. I'm not familiar with that much work trying to do it. Yeah.
Gee, when I saw the ad for the talk, I thought he's going to be talking about robots actually feeling. And to be further faked out, I thought, USC, gosh, Anthony Damasio is there, and I'm wondering if he's interacting with him. And then some of the other questions made me think, gosh, mental health, is he doing Carey-style modeling of the human brain and modeling schizophrenia? You're right there by Hollywood, maybe you're working with animators that are trying to realistically overcome the uncanny valley and so on. So this is sort of a other work at USC question and collaborators who are doing stuff like that.
Yeah. So I've touched, there's a lot of that stuff going on at I saw the Damasio at the Brain Creativity Institute by Antonio. We haven't had a lot of close connection. The closest, so my institute, in general, my institute, we are supposed to be focused on using virtual reality to create social experiences for training. And so things like negotiation, but we're also training physician to interview a patient. The closest connection with Damasio's group is Andrew Gordon at our lab, also a Shank student. Did a lot of work, and he tries to have machines to do storytelling. And he's been looking at stories that involve morals or not, and then they're trying to look at those in a magnet to see when people are reading stories that involve moral issues, does that tend to activate different kinds of brain activity? There's a lot of connection, not with my group, well, not my specific group, but in our lab in general, with Hollywood. And so we hire professional animators. One project I didn't talk about called Gunslinger is kind of Westworld. So there was a guy who actually wrote the script for the original Westworld back in the 70s. And we built an interactive saloon with characters, and he brought in cinematographers so we could see how they created a mood with lighting. So he brought in, and we watched John Ford movies and things. And so there's a lot of attempt to how do you bring the craft of Hollywood into evoking emotion. And so I'm more on the psychological side and interested in human emotion, but there's a lot of people at our institute that in fact, it's much more efficient to cheat, right? And to use all these kind of tricks. And sometimes you can see how those tricks work, so we can show, for example, it's well known that certain kind of lighting influences how people interpret facial expressions in a movie, and then you can have the automatic facial expression recognition techniques look at a person in different lighting conditions, and they get fooled the same way. So there's a lot of kind of interesting connections.
Do you guys look at skin folding at all?
So we have a graphics, Paul DeBevic, who actually just left for Google, ran our graphics group, and he actually just does a data-intensive way to do that. So they have this device called a light stage that has basically a hemisphere of lights, and you put somebody in there, and you have these very high-fidelity, high-speed cameras, and you can capture exactly how your face looks and how it folds as you move it, and then construct a relightable model. And then they use those models in movies. So Spider-Man and all the Spider-Man movies and various kinds of movies. They build these digital heads that do all the, and even things like the fact that light goes through your ears, or if I'm standing next to you, I look a little bit purple. All that kind of stuff gets captured in those kind of models.
One last question. So if you just captured the features, eyes, nose, and mouth, could you presumably read them like words in a sentence? Would it be easier for the AI platform? Say it's a platform that just does text or is not so good at image processing. So there's a AI we're working with and it just is good for text. And
Right.
I wondered if you put very simple graphical eyes, nose, and mouth with nothing else, will it read it like text possibly eventually?
We could mean it.
If you only have those elements, just the features, facial features.
Well, it would convey some kind of information. It wouldn't necessarily map on to the words people are saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I should start the question with a smile, asking you something. But I am curious about what other philosophical frameworks are you drawing on or have you looked into in addition to the legal ethics as you're considering the deception of possibly an artificial agent or coding in deception into an artificial agent going into the future?
Yeah, well, there's a communitarian view, which, and actually this shows up in legal ethics as well, is that that really we should construct mechanisms or ethical frameworks that are focused on the common good as opposed to the individual good.
Right, and that goes into some weird territory, right? Like when you talked about the apples and the oranges example, I would disagree that the Nash equilibrium is the fair choice because it depends on who put in the values of utility.
Yeah.
And if it were individuals, then it's actually fair for her to have all the apples.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's a society, then you go into complicated questions of who is adding who is,
Well, even like fairness, there's like 7 or 8 different principles of fairness. There's, an equity principle which says if I invest in more into this interaction, I should get more out. There's equality principle, which is what I'm using right here. There's a need principle. If you need more resources than me, I have a moral obligation to provide you more than a fair share. And so, yeah, so it's hard.
Not an easy answer. Okay, and the second follow-up question to that would be following on his question, which is, when we talk about human emotions, the ability to model and possibly manipulate and deceive seems somehow more fair because there's an underlying assumption of equality of access, computational skills, and background knowledge, right? And you can argue, to the degree of that. But with AIs now we have, that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, it's like a built machine that perfectly portrays it has emotions, but there's zero connection here, right?
Right, that, and also, arguably way more access to, faster computational skills for facial recognition and associations,
And
access to results from focus groups.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how do you think about that?
It's one of the subcommittees I'm thinking about it. I worry about it. In some sense, I worry more about market research than military research in this sense, because marketing, it's all about how do we get as much information possible on the person in order to make the sale. And emotion, a lot of emotion researchers hang out in marketing departments because there's a reason for that. So I probably don't think about it enough. And as a field, probably people are not thinking about it enough, but that is one of the topics. There's several topics, deception. There's also things like, should you make machines that actually have emotions? And should you have machines that attempt to establish relationships with people? And does that undermine real relationships or not? Because actually in some of our data, we can show that talking to a character like Ellie, you feel less need to talk to a person afterwards. So we call social snacking. And so they satisfy the social need. And so that potentially means that people will be less pro-social. So yeah, there's a lot of ethical implications that need to be worked through. Yeah.
It seems like most of your motion recognition is the facial tracking. Is that anything in the audience to do?
Yeah, so we use, it's easier to show the face. 2 things a lot of the tracking, the low level, I tend to work more at the understanding level. So low level tracking for face, we use a CNLF, CMU, and Facade, which Apple just bought and took off the market. But for voice, we use, I think it's called Open Ear. It's something out of Augsburg, Germany, and we have our own thing, Cobra Rep, I think it's called. Stefan Scheer, our group, does a lot of audio processing stuff. So there's a lot of open source tools for speech. Yeah.
How successful have these virtual negotiations been? Like, has the AI succeeded in getting their fair share so far? And what are kind of the next problems or some blind spots that you're finding?
Yeah, so the fully automated one is not particularly good. And then we have the fully automated one that uses natural language. Because it often misunderstands what's going on. And part of why we added these blocks was because you have multiple channels as to what's going on. And the worst case agent could say, show me what you want. We have a kind of online mechanical Turk one that's more menu-based. And in fact, we have a human agent competition where people can write agents to try to see how well they do against other people. That one, we have some data that the lying one works pretty well. Within these kind of contexts. But these are very simple negotiations. And in fact, I mean, well, there's many problems in negotiation. One is that usually finding good solutions involves some kind of creativity. It requires reframing the problem in a different way or bringing in things outside the negotiation entirely. So when you put the people together, one of the things we tried to force, there was no completely equal way to divide the items. And even though we tried to restrict this because we wanted to keep a small domain, people had a hard time with that, and they keep inventing all these clever ways to make it fair. So, hey, let me give you $5, or maybe we can cut this thing in half, or hey, next time. And so there's a lot of stuff around negotiation that people bring in, so that just beyond the scope of the intelligence that I have right now. So I think in the professor I'm working with, he would use this system for the very first module in a negotiation course, but then quickly he gets into concepts that are just way beyond what we're able to do. Yeah.
You depicted that initially as a rule-based system where you were hard-coding the rules. Have you explored using deep neural networks to try to drive the decision-making?
She's working on some machine learning stuff. No, I haven't. But obviously, that seems to be the good way to get published these days.
And just a follow-up question: how do machines do negotiating against machines? Do they?
Yeah, so there's a lot of people that's actually a lot of research in agent-agent negotiation, and they typically use, a lot of it's kind of heuristic. I mean, there's no game, it's too complicated. Usually the way they frame these tasks, there's not a nice, simple, closed-form solution. But they have these agents that, and they don't, the only way they communicate is through bidding. They just exchange thousands of bids back and forth. And they try to infer from that, based on the pattern of concessions that the other agent's making, probably what their preferences are. Then they try to calculate the Pareto frontier and then try to negotiate along that. And they'll do these kind of exploratory offers to try to, so if I think the frontier is here, I'll give two equivalent offers to you that are equivalent to me. And if you like this one better, that gives me some information about what you want. So they're usually just kind of these heuristic approximations of rational algorithms informed by kind of game theoretic principles.
Well, what's more interesting, though, is when you put the emotions in it, because now you're creating an overlay of a different kind of signaling than just the pricing. Yeah. And you're starting to explore how the emotions interact. And by having machine-to-machine interactions, you can explore that space much more rapidly than you could with
I see. So you just say use kind of the idea of a simulated user and have these machines interact with each other, but the machines are trying to portray themselves as embodying human principles.
Right, because then what you're doing is you're exploring the emotional landscape.
Yeah.
What you might actually find is that, I mean, if you clustered it, you might find that there are emotional cluster points that are different than what you see in human interactions or rare in interactions. You get a much better understanding of sort of what's the range of potential emotions, maybe even emotions that humans don't typically display.
Yeah, that's right.
You might find those, for example, in the animal kingdom where the methods of signaling are different. So it sort of opens up the whole issue of what's the emotional landscape and how do you rapidly explore that?
Yeah, so you could have this like a emotional agent competition. Basically, they're all competing and trying out, exploratory and different strategies and see what kind of equilibriums emerge. And
yeah, so they're doing the numerical bit, but overlaid on top of that is all the emotional signaling that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's an interesting
And
thought.
bluffs and so forth.
We should try that. Yeah, good idea. Yeah.
Have you looked into, or are you familiar with people who have looked into building models, emotional models, higher dimensional emotional models of humans? Machines building higher dimensional emotional models of humans.
So rather than me.
So rather than you. Because you have access to facial gestures and voice and everything, right? So imagine coming up with this, 100 parameter description of human, and then you assign probabilities.
Yeah. There's a guy, the closest I know to that is a guy who used Brookins in Delft, who's doing like reinforcement learning kind of algorithms. That would be the closest I've seen to someone trying to do that. But most of us are still back in the old days of expert systems, building our own.
Join me please and give a warm round of applause.